In 1860, a ragged army of 1,000 revolutionaries marched into Europe's wealthiest kingdom and destroyed it forever. This is the story of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, the defiant realm that refused to join modern Italy. From its glittering opera houses to its blood-soaked final stand, discover why this lost kingdom still divides Italy today. Twilight of a Forgotten Throne. In the sun-drenched lands of southern Italy, where ancient temples crumbled beside sleepy villages and the sea whispered tales of empire, there once stood a kingdom born of two names, one soul, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Forged in 1816 from the ashes of the kingdoms of Naples and Sicily, it became the mightiest realm in Italy, its crown resting on the proud heads of the Bourbon dynasty. Yet beneath its fertile fields and gilded palaces, discontent simmered. When Giuseppe Garibaldi swept through the land like a storm in 1860, the kingdom's fate was sealed not by swords alone, but by the will of its people, who voted to dissolve centuries of royal rule in the name of unity. Thus, in a swirl of passion and betrayal, grandeur and loss, the Two Sicilies vanished into history, its crown broken, its voice silenced, but its legacy forever echoing in the soul of the South. Where two crowns began. Long before the rise and fall of the Two Sicilies, a storm of conquest and ambition brewed in the heart of the Mediterranean. In 1061, Norman warriors, fierce and devout, landed on the island of Sicily and wrested it from the Saracens who had ruled it for centuries. Their leader, Roger I, carved out a realm from the ashes of old empires, and his son Roger II, brilliant, ruthless, united Sicily, Calabria, and Apulia into a new kingdom in 1131. Under his reign, southern Italy flourished, defiant and independent. But peace was fleeting. The crown passed by marriage to the German Staufer dynasty when Henry VI wed Constance, Roger II's daughter. Their child, Frederick II, crowned emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, ruled not from cold German castles but from the sunlit courts of Palermo and Naples. Though called emperor, he never ruled a unified Italy. His kingdom, the southern one, stood apart, bold and unyielding. From this complex legacy of conquest, diplomacy, and defiance, the roots of the Two Sicilies took hold, an empire born from both sword and scroll, destined for glory and sorrow. A kingdom torn by crowns and blood. From the clash of empires and the whisper of papal ambition, a new player stepped into Sicily's blood-stained stage, Charles of Anjou, a French prince crowned not by bloodline, but by papal will. In 1266, he struck down Manfred, the last bold Hohenstaufen to defy Rome, and seized Naples. Just 2 years later, young Conradin, the dynasty's final hope, was captured and executed, his noble blood spilled on Neapolitan soil. Yet Sicily would not bow quietly. In 1282, the island erupted in a violent revolt, the Sicilian Vespers, and with a single spark, French rule was cast into the sea. Peter III of Aragon, heir through Manfred's line, was hailed as king, and so the once mighty Norman kingdom was shattered into two rival thrones, the island ruled by Aragon, the mainland by the French Angevins. Though a fragile peace came in 1302, confusion reigned as both claimed the title King of Sicily. For a fleeting moment in 1442, Alfonso V of Aragon united them under one crown, but death, illegitimacy, and foreign ambition shattered it again. Naples fell to the French, then to Spain, and the dream of a single kingdom faded into a tangled legacy of war, betrayal, and broken thrones. The chessboard of thrones. As Europe's empires played their ruthless games of power, the crowns of Naples and Sicily were passed like prize tokens across a blood-stained chessboard. In 1516, the great Charles V, heir to the Habsburg, Aragonese, and Castilian thrones, claimed both kingdoms in a sweeping dynastic triumph, folding them into his vast empire. But peace was a fragile illusion. When the Spanish Habsburgs died out in 1700, the kingdoms became battlegrounds in the War of the Spanish Succession. The Bourbons, then Austria, then Savoy, all laid claim. Naples stayed with Austria, while Sicily, briefly in Savoyard hands, was swapped for Sardinia like a bargaining chip in 1720. For a time, Naples, Sicily, became shorthand for a fractured union under distant Habsburg rule. But in the War of the Polish Succession, the tide turned again. Spanish troops, led by the young and ambitious Charles of Bourbon, struck a decisive blow at Bitonto in 1734. With victory, Naples and Sicily were finally pulled back under Bourbon control, setting the stage for a new era of southern Italian identity, still torn by history, but once again forging its own path. The Bourbon rebirth. In 1735, the kingdoms of Naples and Sicily found not just a ruler, but a king who walked their streets, who ruled not from distant courts but from within their sunlit walls, Infante Charles of Bourbon. For the first time in over 2 centuries, the crown was worn by a monarch who truly lived the land he governed. In Naples, Charles poured his spirit into grand visions, expanding the city, curbing the church's long grip on power, and laying the foundations of the majestic palace of Caserta, a Versailles of the south, meant to dazzle and command. Sicily, by contrast, remained a subdued sister, its role more symbolic than sovereign. But Charles's reign was not to last. In 1759, he inherited the Spanish throne and, bound by international treaties, passed Naples and Sicily to his young son Ferdinand IV. With this, the Bourbon-Sicily line was born, tethered tightly to the great powers through Ferdinand's marriage to Maria Carolina of Austria. As revolution gripped France and war loomed across Europe, Naples-Sicily looked outward once more, not to Madrid or Vienna, but to Britain's navy, clinging to survival against the tides of change that threatened to sweep the old world away. A crown reforged in fire. In the ashes of Napoleonic upheaval, Ferdinand IV of Bourbon returned to reclaim his fractured realm, both Naples and a restless, constitutionally empowered Sicily. But this was no simple homecoming. In 1816 he swept away Sicily's hard-won charter and, with a decree that echoed through centuries, forged a single state, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. Crowned now as Ferdinand I, he ruled over a realm bruised by revolution and plagued by brigandage, where the nobility and clergy had been weakened, but chaos had crept in their place. Though he kept some Napoleonic reforms, pressure from conservative giants, Austria, Russia, and Prussia, forced him into a reactionary straitjacket. When the exiled King Joachim Murat returned in a last, desperate gamble, he was swiftly crushed, and the kingdom recoiled deeper into repression. Still, resistance flickered. Beneath the surface, the Carbonari, secret societies of liberals and dreamers, plotted change. Their revolt in 1820 forced Ferdinand's trembling hand to sign a constitution, only for it to be torn apart months later beneath the boots of 50,000 Austrian soldiers. The dream of liberty was drowned in blood and silence, and the kingdom, now tightly chained to foreign will, staggered forward, monarchic, divided, and deeply afraid of its own people. The final flickers before the storm. Beneath the glitter of reforms and gaslights, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies simmered with unrest. After the crushing of the 1828 coup, repression only deepened, bureaucratic rot festered, and the countryside descended into lawlessness. When Francis I died in 1830, he left behind little more than a hollow order of chivalry and a bitter memory of reaction. His son, Ferdinand II, seemed at first a breath of fresh air, offering amnesty, cutting taxes, even launching southern Italy's first railway, despite clerical outrage over tunnels deemed obscene. But hope was short-lived. In 1836, cholera swept through Sicily like divine wrath, killing tens of thousands. Discontent rippled through pamphlets and uprisings, small at first, but growing bolder. Then came January 12, 1848, Palermo exploded into open revolt, demanding the return of Sicily's lost constitution. Across the kingdom, revolution sparked. For a fleeting moment, Ferdinand II leaned liberal. He appointed a reformist prime minister, broke with Austria, and declared war. But Sicily refused to bend or unify with the mainland's cautious reformers. Enraged, the king unleashed his Swiss Guard. Naples was crushed in May, Messina by September, and finally, after bitter resistance, Palermo itself fell in May 1849. What remained was a kingdom visibly modern on the surface, but haunted by the ghosts of broken promises and bracing for its reckoning. Twilight of a kingdom. By the dawn of 1849, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies had crushed its revolutions with ruthless efficiency, but in doing so, it sowed the seeds of its own undoing. King Ferdinand II, once a young reformer with lofty ideals, had hardened into a monarch gripped by fear and suspicion. The constitution was reduced to ink on forgotten parchment, and half the liberal parliament of 1848 was imprisoned or exiled. Prisons swelled, torture became routine, and the world began to watch. When British statesman William Gladstone visited Naples, he emerged with words that echoed across Europe: the negation of God erected into a system of government. In response to the kingdom's defiant cruelty, Britain and France severed diplomatic ties. Behind palace walls, the king clung to protectionist policies and a crumbling economy, as Naples, Italy's most populous city, grew bloated and desperate, its streets ruled by poverty-stricken lazzaroni. Meanwhile, whispers of unity stirred in the north. While Naples printed its first stamps and fumbled toward modernity, it remained isolated, blind to the tide of history. The world had turned against it, and the storm of Garibaldi was soon to descend. The Fall and the Fusion, 1860 to 1861. Until 1849, the political yearnings of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies had remained stubbornly local, Neapolitan, Sicilian, rarely Italian. Even the Great Sicilian Uprising of 1848 sought autonomy from Naples, not union with the Italian north. The idea of Italy as a unified nation had failed to take root in the sun-baked streets of Palermo or the Baroque palaces of Naples. But the tides of history, stirred by revolution and war, were shifting. With Austria's crushing defeat in 1859 and the swift consolidation of northern Italy, Giuseppe Garibaldi saw his moment. In May 1860, with a ragtag band of volunteers known as the Thousand, he landed at Marsala, launching one of the most daring popular invasions in modern history. Though initially unofficial, his campaign had the quiet blessing of Count Cavour, Prime Minister of Piedmont Sardinia. What began as a gamble quickly turned into a crusade. Sicilian peasants, disillusioned with Bourbon rule, flocked to Garibaldi's red banners. Garibaldi swept through Sicily, crossed the Strait of Messina, and marched on Naples. His volunteers, now swollen by thousands of locals, clashed with Bourbon troops at the Battle of the Volturno. They triumphed. King Francis II, isolated and embattled, retreated to Gaeta, where a prolonged siege ended in his surrender and abdication in February 1861. At Tino, Garibaldi met Victor Emmanuel II and offered him the keys to the south. The Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, once Europe's largest and wealthiest southern monarchy, ceased to exist, absorbed into a new national identity. In March 1861, the Kingdom of Italy was proclaimed.